Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on California farmland values. Going to give it just a minute here to let additional people filter in. All right, let's get started. Excited to be here today to share some of the results from our California farmland values report that is being released today. I have with me Drew Lipke, who is the Managing Director of Investments at AcreTrader. Drew, I'd like you to just tell us a little bit about yourself and your role here.
Yeah, so I've been here at AcreTrader for the last almost 3 years now. And my job on the farm team is to head up the sourcing and diligence and underwriting of everything that we bring to the platform. And most of my focus over the last several years has been in California. And as we're going to discuss in here, everything in California starts first and foremost with the value of water and understanding the value of water. So I think this is a really, unique report that Aaron and the team at Acres have put together, and excited to walk through this here.
Great. Thanks, Drew. And I am Aaron Shue, so I'm our head of data science on the Acres team. I've been here a few years now, and so all the data that you see in the acres.com platform comes through or gets started with my team and then moves into the tool. So with that, we will get going here now that we've got some introductions. So Drew and I, this is a really interesting collaboration where we actually collaborated. The AcreTrader farm team brought their expertise to the table, and we brought the data from Acres. So our transaction data, along with other important data sets you'll hear more about, to collaborate, putting expertise and data together. And so we'll get started from there. So first, why produce a report specifically on California land values? Well, there are a lot of reasons. It's a very challenging project for those of you in the market. You know well that it is a complex place to analyze land values for a whole host of reasons. The crop optionality, particularly for permanent crops where you have varying maturity groups and water dynamics and soil dynamics, very challenging to produce a report. That said, we have put together a platform, Acres, that contains a lot of the data that you need to analyze land values for a specific property. And today, what we're doing in this report is trying to take all that property level data and aggregating it up to tease out trends from the time frame of 2018 to 2023. Of course, very important ag producer in California. It's dynamic, challenging, diverse, produces about 2/3 of the fruits and nuts in the U.S. It also produces about 1/3 of the vegetables in the U.S. So very important agricultural contributor. So diving into Acres, we've put together the three main data sets that you're going to see come together here that make this really unique relative to anything else that's been released, is our transaction data with crop data that is not USDA cropland data layer data. Lots of folks have CDL. Not many people have put transaction data with the California field level crop information that also contains maturity group data. And then we put that together with our surface irrigation districts or water districts across the Central Valley. So those three data sets come together in this report in a really unique way. So I'll talk briefly about each of these. So the Acres sales database contains millions of property level transactions across the U.S. It's a nationwide database. We have a significant number of transactions, of course, in California and throughout the Central Valley, which is where we focus this study. So these sales come from assessors, They come from brokers, they come from lenders, and appraisers. So all of those groups contribute to the sales that were in this analysis. So with that in mind, we dive in. Even though Acres is a national platform, we have some very specific features for our folks in California. One of those that we've had for a while now is water information. So this includes GSAs and water districts. Again, the focus today and in this report is on the surface irrigation districts. But within the tool, you can get GSAs, IDs. It provides emails as well as phone numbers for district leaders so that you can get in touch with folks to learn more about the water in that region. You can filter sales within Acres by water district. So you can isolate your sales data by price per acre, by crop type, which is on our next slide, as well as by district, which is quite unique relative to any other type of platform out there. So we analyzed data from 2018 through 2023 in this analysis, basically thinking of it as pre-pandemic 18-19, pandemic in 2020 and 2021, and then post-pandemic in 22 and 23, primarily because the market is quite different in each of those three periods, which you're going to see today. So last but not least, of course, is the California crop data. So we have this for everything in the Central Valley, and it reports, so this data goes from, I believe, 2018 through 2023 as well. So very unique to the Acres platform. And with this, I'd like to ask Drew to just give a little bit more information about his work and how he uses Acres in a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it's interesting that Acres actually evolved out of the AcreTrader farm team originally. We were using a lot of different data sets across the country, whether that be comparable sales, managing properties, soil levels, irrigation districts, whatever it may be. And we started to create our own tool in-house. And out of that evolved in the Acres product. And today, AcreTrader is an enterprise user, like many other enterprise users out there, of Acres. Acres also has this kind of business intelligence capability where we actually can walk across the hall and talk to Aaron and his team and say, hey, we're really looking for this customer into this one specific thing. What data can we derive from this to make an educated decision? And that's the whole thing with AcreTraders is it provides access to farmland, but the other piece that you need is transparency and confidence based on data. And that is where Acres comes into play in this kind of evolving asset class that is farmland. And so we use this all day, every day. We're a major contributor to it. And it's amazing what has been accomplished over the last year with the Acres product.
Thanks, Drew. That's a great introduction. And with that, we'll start to dive into the report. So what do we actually include in the California report? We have annual crops, of course. These are particularly interesting: alfalfa, corn, cotton, hay, rice, and miscellaneous field crops. You can think of annual crops as having the greatest crop optionality because you can plant anything on it. It could convert even to a permanent crop. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we look at some of the figures. We include almonds, citrus, grapes, pistachios, stone fruit, walnuts, and miscellaneous for permanent crops. We do deep dive analysis on each of those. Price per acre analysis, water district level analysis, and a number of maps across the time periods that I mentioned. We did meticulous filtering of our data. So even though there are hundreds of thousands of sales in California, we actually peeled that down to about 12,000 in this 2018 to 2023 timeframe. And we peel it down because, one, many transactions are going to have improvements and things like that drag that price per acre really high. So, of course, we use an upper limit. I think on permanent crops, we use 70,000 per acre. On annuals, we did 50,000 an acre. And we dropped everything below $1,000 an acre. But even after that, we went through and every single district and crop, we actually looked at the bottom sales or manually removed non-arm's length sales, or we removed high-end sales that may have have had improvements on them. It's pretty important when you're trying to tease out trends for any of these crops with how diverse they are. We also looked at the maturity groups in permanent crops and discuss how the maturity of crops would influence those prices per acre. We isolated about 100 surface irrigation districts in the Central Valley and analyzed those along with the white space or areas outside of districts throughout the Central Valley. So this would not be, we would not include things down in Imperial or on the coast or anything like that. We really wanted to focus on the Central Valley for this analysis. Okay, so we can start with annual crops. We evaluate the number of transactions, the acres sold, and the dollar amount by quarter. For each of those in an aggregate view, we then break that out by water district to paint this broad picture for annual crops throughout the Central Valley. And so the first figure I'm going to pull up here is our annual cropland acres sold. So each of those stacked bars is going to give you an idea of how many acres of each crop were sold that quarter. Of course, there's a notable drop in 2022 and particularly in 2023 relative to the 2018 through 2021 timeframe. And so, Drew, I'd like to ask you, how does this reflect? You're an expert on these markets. Does this reflect what you're seeing or what you have seen? Tell us a little bit more about this.
Yeah, this is really indicative of what we saw in 2023. 2023 was an environment where really sellers were just not willing to accept the new environment, the new reality of where buyers' expectations were. And you really just saw volumes dry up. And you see this in the chart here and put it in context. I mean, 2023 total acres sold here were down 41% from 2022 and down 65% from the 2021 peak. It seems that we are now seeing this logjam break here in 2024, and we're going to touch on some recent trends here in a little bit. But yeah, this is absolutely indicative of the last year.
Great. Thank you for breaking that down. And from there, we'll go to our annual cropland sold. So just kind of looking at the dollar amount. So this is going to be your y-axis here is millions of dollars. So the thing that sticks out like a sore thumb is Q4 of 2021. We'll see that here, and we'll see it repeated for permanent crops. A massive spike, a 40% quarter over quarter increase in Q4 21 in millions of dollars spent on annual. So that's $600 million worth of permanent or annual crops sold. Tell us a little bit about this, Drew.
Yeah. I would say that a lot of the ground that was suitable for permanent crop development really drove a lot of what you saw in 2020 and 2021. When you look at non-bearing acreage, for example, for almonds, it peaked in 2020 and 2021. It has since pulled back. And when you look at what's going on with almond and pistachio pricing in particular, that's really what's driven what you see here, where total sales in 2023 were down 43% versus 2022. A lot of that is just this land that was suitable for permanent crops, and really just nobody's doing developments now.
Yeah, that's a great point. So then we break this down by district for those irrigation districts we've included across the Central Valley. So again, we're not going to dive into any specific district in this map, but I want to point out some of the trends that I think are notable and important. So first off, you're going to notice that Eastern districts, of course, are higher price per acre than Western districts, and they tend to grow or be a bit more stable. Northern districts and Southern districts, you can see some growth, but in general, you see a lot more variation, just more volatile, a little bit less predictable land values in the northern part of the valley or the southern part of the valley. Anything else that you would note here, Drew? Does that kind of cover the overall trends?
Yeah, it does. And I think we're going to get into a bit more detail here in the coming slides. So,
right. So kind of mirroring the annual cropland acres sold, now we've got permanent cropland acres sold. So you see here that we've got a couple of things sticking out. So what's interesting to me in Q3 of 2019, those of you familiar with the California market probably know of that sale. That's the Prima Wawona sale for stone fruit. So we picked that up here, and While that was an outlier of a sale, I think what's notable to call out is that that is a very different situation than Q4 of 2020 or Q4 of 2021, where we see the entire market shift in terms of acres sold across permanent crops. A lot more almonds, a lot more pistachios, a lot more grapes. Just everything was turning over and pretty hot in that 2020 and 2021 period in terms of acreage turnover. Of course, it's leveled back out, you see in 2022 and 2023. So pretty notable. Drew, what else would you call out here? I know that permanent crops are they vary in terms of what they need by microclimate, soils, water. What else could you tell us about this?
I mean, again, it's indicative of kind of the standoff that we saw in 2023. I mean, you got permanent cropland acres here down 23% year over year, down 30% from the peak. And then the typical Q4 seasonality that we saw in 2020 and 2021, that really broke down in 22 and 2023. And it just really speaks to the really large bid-ask spread between buyers and sellers in the market that we've experienced. And again, that is something that I think is starting to break in real time right now.
That's a good point, and I think this next slide further highlights that. So if we look at permanent cropland sold in millions of dollars, we see Q4 of 20 and 21 breaking $1.2 billion in those quarters, which is just about half, more than half of what we saw back in 2018 and again in 2023. But notable relative to our acreage slide, acreage sold, is that obviously the price has gone way down on the acreage overall for permanent crops. That's a pretty notable drop. So, Drew, what else are you hearing in the market that would relate to some of that?
Yeah, kind of speaking to the logjam, I mean, you've got the Prima Wawona assets are in Chapter 11 and being worked out right now, and we'll touch some more details on that here in a bit. You have Trinitas Farming. That's another 8,600 acres of almonds. I believe those bids are due May 17th, and I think those transactions are likely going to close in the July timeframe. At least that's the plan at this point. There's a lot of unknowns right now with the Assemi family. That acreage is up to 28,000 acres. And if you put those three transactions together, that alone is almost $1 billion of permanent crop supply that's on the market today. And again, that's just three transactions. That compares to the less than $2.4 billion that closed in all of 2023. I can tell you anecdotally, there's a lot of supply in addition to just these three transactions. What you're seeing in the market is generally for sellers. And this flood of supply has really caused a lot of buyers to, take the stance of, I'm just going to wait on lower prices, wait on better opportunities, while some of these larger transactions kind of clear the market, and we're sort of finding that market clearing price.
Very good points. And with that, let's dive further into some of our crop specific findings, and we're going to start with almonds. But for several reasons. So it's obviously a hot topic for some of the reasons you've mentioned. Almonds are the largest permanent crop by planted acreage in the valley, so that's a good reason to highlight this. Prices have been down for almonds recently, and again, just highlighting that overall market trend. You're going to see some of this impact in the following charts, but low cost of capital during the pre-pandemic and pandemic time period. Lower input costs, and then of course 22 and 23 we've seen rising costs of capital have a pretty dramatic impact on the almond market. So I want to introduce almonds with this slide about irrigation districts, and so we do some water district specific analysis as well, but we wanted to think of a way that we could visualize this more broadly. So what we did is we categorized districts into tier 1 and tier 2. We tossed around other ideas with a tier 3, but ultimately what we realized is that it was pretty easy to agree on what tier 1 districts were. Ran that by a number of folks in the industry, and of course Drew and his team have helped with this. Basically, tier 1 districts are those that have very good, dependable surface water. So there are 13 districts, including Turlock, Fresno Irrigation District, Modesto, and obviously others, but I won't list them all out here. And then tier 2 is basically everything else. So even if it had okay or mediocre water, we just threw it all together to see what the trends would look like. And to me, this is a pretty interesting analysis because it shows that really good surface water districts maintained their value. We saw, a good amount of growth through 2021, and of course, it's plateaued a bit since then. But they're maintaining value better than tier 2 districts, which we see are declining coming out of 22 and into 23. And Drew, what does this kind of confirm what you're seeing? Any additional thoughts?
Yeah, we're going to get into this a bit more detail, but consistent theme that I think everybody needs to pay attention to here is just the resiliency of tier 1 districts, even in this market that we're experiencing over the last 12 months now.
And given some of the rapid changes, of course, in the almond market, we actually broke this out quarterly from beginning of 22 to present. And Drew, I know you've got a lot to say about this, so I'm going to let you take it away.
Yeah, so that last slide was transactions on an annual basis. Here, again, it's quarterly, and it's through Q1 of 24, which is actually something that's not in the other report. So you get to see a little bit more update on what's happening here. Also, we took one additional step and refined this further to only include almond orchards that are between 3rd and 15th leaf. And then we use the same criteria for tier 1, tier 2 irrigation districts. And what you really see is that tier 2 districts have seen much greater weakness relative to tier 1, though both have experienced declines. For example, tier 1 districts are down 10% since the first quarter of 2022 based on this analysis, while tier 2 districts are down 36% over the same time frame. Just based on the significant supply that's coming on the market, the continued weak almond prices that we're seeing as a result of the exceptional bloom period that we just experienced, it's reasonable to assume that this downtrend in prices will continue. But again, it demonstrates that resilience of the tier 1 districts, even during periods of abundant water. 2023 was a wet year. The snowpack currently is anywhere from 85 to 110% on average. Reservoirs are full. None of the Central Valley of California is in a drought. And so you would think in that environment, many people wouldn't worry about water, but this shows the importance of water for a long-term asset, such as permanent crops and farmland in general. It's a critical thing to understand.
That's super helpful to understand this market. And aside from orchard age, we also looked at this on a district by district basis. And again, this is just a selection of districts. It's still we try to make it as useful as possible without too much noise. It takes a minute to understand, but I think it's an important chart. You can see the trends across Alta as an example, increased up to 2020 and then sort of plateaued and of course has declined since 2022. We see some of the best districts, of course, maintaining their price per acre from 21 through 23. And again, this is not limited to orchard age in the same way that the quarterly analysis was. So there's certainly more to understand there. But this breaks it down and you see a clear difference in good districts and Westlands as an example of basically tear out almond ground. So as a user of acres, Drew, does this reflect how you might analyze some of the transaction data for your underwriting?
Yeah, the biggest thing that stands out when you look at this chart is just the variance in land values between districts. And when we kind of did this whole exercise, I was really encouraged when we looked at this data and the results were, on par with what you would expect. Trying to avoid confirmation bias, but districts like Modesto and Turlock and Fresno and Consolidated and Exchange Contractors, they all really stand out in the top range here in value per acre in that kind of upper 30s, low 40s, $40,000 per acre range, while these lower reliability districts are in that kind of 20 to 25. That's really what we have experienced. And certainly there are a lot of nuances with any given property, but for us, it all starts with putting a bare ground value on that irrigation district, which is based on the value of the water. And then you run an NPV on the value of the trees thereafter. We obviously look at surface water supplies and historical deliveries and drought conditions and, overlay data such as this that makes our underwriting and our diligence and really our ability to spot opportunities that much more powerful.
Excellent. Well, with that, we're going to move from almonds to citrus. Highlight another, and again, we're not going to cover every analysis provided in the full report or even every crop. It would take too long, but we tried to pull those in that we found most interesting as we conducted this analysis for the report, and those that we think would be interesting to our industry partners. So with citrus, the goal here again is to isolate the overall trends in pricing. Citrus is pretty unique in terms of the varieties and how varieties are priced. It's also, it's a specific belt where you've got the right soils, water, and mixture of microclimate that makes citrus a viable and important crop. So with that, we'll look at the same analysis that we did for almonds, again, looking at best water districts as tier 1, and then sort of everything else as tier 2. And we see pretty consistent growth through 2022. I think, to me, the most notable thing, of course, is tier 2 coming from 21 into 22. So you see a pretty steep increase, but likewise, much more volatility. So, decline right back down in 23, whereas tier 1 districts maintain their value to the end of 2023. So pretty interesting analysis here, I think. Drew, what do experts in citrus look for? I mean, it's a very unique permanent crop relative to others. There are other things to consider. So tell us a little bit more about what you're looking at or evaluating when you're going to go underwrite a citrus orchard.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it. Citrus is going to see a lot more variability when you compare it to, say, tree nuts in terms of the value of the improvements, just due to the fact that you have much more by way of varieties, more in terms of orchard ages. So that NPV of the trees can swing around quite a bit. You'll see a lot of orchards that are in need of redevelopment. Often you'll see those trade closer to bare ground values around, say, I would think kind of 20,000 per acre, depending on the irrigation district. And, you have a lot of demand variance in terms of the varieties, such as tangos, that when properly developed, and let's say they're just coming into maturity in kind of that 6-leaf range, you can see prices for those get up in, that sort of north of $50,000 per acre range. So that really just kind of speaks to the variability and how critical that first step is in dialing in that bare ground value based on water.
Yeah. That's a great point. And again, all the more reason, I think, to look at the more specific, districts level analysis. And, again, we see, I would say, a bright spot, right? I mean, we see declines even in good districts coming towards the end of 23. But it seems like citrus is more resilient. That's my takeaway from this chart, is that there's more variability in the growth period, right? You got low cost of capital from 19 to 22. And so you see some really good consistent growth. And then we've seen a little decline. And maybe there's more coming into Q1. We haven't looked at that here yet. But it seems like citrus is a bit of a bright spot relative to something like almonds. Am I wrong, or is there more to say there, Drew?
Yeah, no, you're right. Citrus, especially relative to tree nuts, has been a bright spot in the Central Valley. And, just kind of like looking at this, to me, I mean, the citrus belt, runs along the east side of the valley between Bakersfield and Fresno. Because of that geographic location and the microclimates there, you see a bit lower variability in terms of microclimate and soils. And just in looking at surface water supply, I think you can broadly break down, the citrus belt in terms of those areas that have riparian or appropriative rights out of the rivers coming out of the Sierra Nevadas, such as the Kings and Cahuilla and Tule. And then those districts that are more reliant on the Central Valley Project. And, those with senior rights out of the rivers are generally stronger. So when you look at kind of the higher end tier, you look at something like Alta, they have senior rights on the Kings River. So that's where you can use these like yardsticks, such as we see here, in order to kind of measure value, which again is that critical first step. And, there's a saying, probably going to butcher it, you can't manage what you can't measure. Right. When you're investing and valuing farmland in the Central Valley, you just can't understand the value of water and then measure what you're buying against if you don't have this kind of data to rely on. And so this is always the first step, is this kind of benchmarking exercise to understand irrigation districts, and then you can spot areas where land might be over or underpriced.
great points. This is the power to me. The fun part of this project for me, Drew, was that I got to bring data and analysis, and I have a background, of course, in ag production. But you bring such a depth of industry experience on the investment side. It was really great to learn from you in analyzing this information. So with that, I want to move to a bit of a different, so this is not included in the full reports. Those that are here today are going to get a unique set of insights that we looked at in acres, using acres data and some additional data. So we're going to look at the Prima Wawona 2018-19 sales, which is what you're seeing here on the map. And what we've put together is the initial sales and then those that have been sold this year and the price per acre for those, or those that are pending. And so we wanted to provide more of a business case for ways that you can use acres data, the crop data, the water district data, and the transaction data in one place. So Drew, I really, our team and your team specifically have looked at this in great depth. I'd like for you to tell us what you're seeing here.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great example. I mean, AcreTrader is an enterprise user on the Acres platform. Last year in the summer, a group approached us about the Prima Wawona assets and just really needed some help and a third-party opinion of putting a value on the farmland. And really because we had the ability to walk across the hall, team up with the Acres team as needed, and really quickly parse out this portfolio and break it down by leaf age and break it down by water district, and then quickly ascribe values to the acreage, that sits in Alta and Consolidated and Fresno and Raisin City. We were able to quickly put a value, an initial estimate on that 13,000 odd acres in really just a couple of days. It really speaks to the quality of the data that's in there. And it was interesting when the company then filed for Chapter 11 last October. The liquidation value that they placed on the land was about 3% above the value that we had put on it for this client. And so obviously, our valuation was pending boots on the ground diligence, but again, it just speaks to the power of, having such high quality data. And then, we quickly looked at, based on the closed sales in the database, based on the court documents, you can see that there's just under 5,200 acres that have closed. There's quite a bit of discrepancy in values that you see here, but I mean, this is a real-time transaction that's taking place. And it again points to something that we've consistently seen, which is that the tier 1 districts, so here I would look at Alta and FID, there's only one transaction in Consolidated, so hard to call that a sample set, but it seems, again, it's another point that these are really holding their value in this very difficult market. In addition to Prima Wawona, you have the Trinitas assets that are currently being marketed. That's about 8,600 acres. So that's another instance where, in order to make an educated decision on those 8,600 acres that sit in, I think, 3 or 4 different counties, and you have variances from 10th to 4th leaf there, there's a lot of complexity to work through, but, you're quickly able to hash it out with something like this. And again, being able to benchmark, being able to understand the value allows you to be able to spot opportunities. And that's, what's been so encouraging to me about having something that provides this level of transparency in the market.
Excellent. Thanks, Drew. That's a really insightful analysis you put together. And so that's going to wrap up our webinar for the most part. So, of course, you can go, if you haven't seen Acres, be happy to show you around, give you a tour of what our land sales database looks like. Also look at the water districts in California and GSAs and the additional data that we provide that's not even in the report or in the webinar. There's a lot there. And so with that, I do want to open it up for questions. Please drop your questions in the chat. I know there are a couple already in there, so Drew and I can kind of tag team these. So starting at the top here, it looks like Walter says, I want to have water districts added to acreage. Not quite sure what Walter's getting at, but perhaps interested in looking at the total acreage by permanent crop by water district. I think that's a great analysis. We consider doing something like that even here, and we may do that in the future. The reality is I actually pinged everyone on LinkedIn not too long ago and said, hey, we're doing this analysis of cropland values in California. What should we analyze? And I got probably 3 years worth of suggestions to analyze. So we couldn't fit it all in. We did our best to provide what we thought would be the most useful way to look at this in an initial report. Does not mean we will not continue doing further analyses. We will, but we had to. I mean, it's already 40 pages long, so it's there's a lot in there. But great suggestion for future work, Walter. Thank you. Next is from Lydia. So yeah, I think this came in when we're on the Almond slide, probably in reference to the tier 1 districts, or is this being purchased by home builders? So I think the meaning there is, were some of the transactions included in our analysis conversion ground, right? Almonds being taken out and then developed. While it's always a possibility of that, when we remove the price per acre max and min, we actually manually evaluated the high-end transactions, made sure that there were no houses on it, made sure that there were still trees on it. In many cases, looked at the maturity. So how old, again, we did the 3rd through 15th leaf orchard analysis. So while it's possible 1 or 2 snuck in there, the overall trend probably wouldn't have been affected a whole lot by, even if 1 or 2 snuck in. There were enough transactions and volume there that I don't think it would have swayed our analysis. So where do you define and what methodology differentiates tier 1 and tier 2 water districts? We do define those in the report. So, and again, it's free to download. So I would direct you there to go look at which districts we selected for tier 1, as well as some of the methodology. And then from Krishna, looking at the almonds price per acre varying from 10,000 to 45, can you explain if distance from urban concentrated population centers has any impact? So I'm actually going to take that as 2 questions, I think. And Drew, I might let you take the first. So the 10,000 to 45,000, that's, as a data guy, that's my first question too when I look at that, right? You look at Westlands or outside of water district areas and you get these low prices per acre, and then 45K an acre. That's even with water at hand, that's a massive difference. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, I mean, that goes to the variance in the quality of the surface water supply. I mean, if you're in a white space where you don't have surface water, or if you're in a lower quality irrigation district on the west side, your bare ground values are going to be sub $10,000 an acre. Whereas if you go over to the east side and you're in Turlock or Modesto, or even go in the west side and a little bit north over to exchange contractors where you have very high reliability of your surface water supply, those bare ground values are, in recent years, we've seen them kind of in that $25,000 to $30,000 range. The other thing that's going to swing that variance is if I'm buying a 6-leaf orchard, I'm running NPV on those trees and they have much longer life on them, call it 25 years for each orchard. Whereas if I'm buying a 15th leaf orchard, I've got 10 years left of cash flows before I need to redevelop that. So that's the other factor that can really swing. And then there's certainly other nuances there, but those are the material factors that swing value.
That's a great point. It reminds me of a comment I got from someone that they said that roughly they'd done some analysis and roughly the value really on a price per acre basis was about 80%. 80% of the value of an acre was for the water on that acre. Yeah. And this actually breaks that down pretty nicely if you think of that 45K to 10K split for almonds. What you're paying for an FID or one of those other tier 1 districts is that 70, 80% of that value is in the water going into the trees. So, and then distance to urban concentrated population centers. So most of these transactions are outside of the city limits, obviously. And I saw another question pop up about minimum acreage. So we did a minimum of 10 acres. In many cases, we didn't have anything less than 20 acres in there. Again, manually went through the transactions to make sure they were for sure permanent crop transactions or annual crop transactions. Certainly for annual crops, I imagine if you get closer into a city, the value may go up a bit in price per acre terms. I don't think we saw anything really consistently moving the trend around as we analyze this data. Right. Would you comment anything else on that?
Yeah, I mean, you see it in like Fresno Irrigation District and the growth around Fresno. There has been some influence of development, obviously, there. That's something you just can't get around. But, going through the analysis, we specifically stripped out instances where we saw a home builder was purchasing farmland. So that was accounted for as much as it realistically could be. I mean, but there's always going to be that development pressure on farmland.
Yes, that's right. Especially in the Central Valley, it's just a dynamic place, and again, that's why in a lot of places I've written reports on. I've got a Heartland report, which is Midwest land values. It's so much easier to analyze. Just it's so much more homogeneous and consistent, and you don't have the dynamics that you do in the Central Valley. So certainly a good point. And of course, if you're looking at a specific piece of land, you want to consider those factors. Michael has asked us, looks like there are a lot of conversions from conventional to organic, and he's wondering if we have some of that data embedded in the sales prices. We did not look at that specifically in this analysis. What you will see in acres, so our assessor data, of course, is not going to have whether it's conventional or organic. But the data that my team puts in that we gather from the industry often includes additional collateral. So our curated sales database, for example, will have all of the information about that farm, things about the soil, things about the water, improvements, and so forth. And of course, people that do have organic are going to note that in the sales collateral. So we did not analyze that in this particular case. I'm not sure if we'd have enough power. Not sure how many organic sales there were relative to conventional. I imagine it's a small number, but very good question that we might attempt at some point down the road. Looks like, let's see. Have you been asked to rate the quality of the soil, especially relative to the concentrated salts and solids? Maybe too esoteric. It's a great question, Joel. So I'm going to let Drew answer the question for the most part. I do want to note that within Acres, you have access to the National Soils Database. Alongside that, we have the California Specific Story Index. So you do get some soil quality information that's tied to a given property at a pretty high resolution, spatial resolution. But in terms of this analysis specifically, or what we might be able to say about that anecdotally, Drew, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the soil mapping that we have certainly helps, but that is also one of those things where, if we're in the Corn Belt, then we have a lot of confidence in the productivity indexes on each state in the Corn Belt. But when we go to California, that's one of those things that you really need to confirm based on boots on the ground diligence. When you get in certain areas on, say, the west side, and you get a little heavier soils, I mean, the buildup of salts in the root zone can be very detrimental. And so, some districts on the west side that have good water have very poor soils, and that's just something that you need to account for in your evaluation and analysis. So it is esoteric, unfortunately. I can answer the next one. Notice you don't have CCID, Central California Irrigation District, in your report. The reason that you don't see it specifically listed is that the exchange contractors, San Luis, Columbia, Fireball Canal, and CCID, those four were all lumped together because there's very little variance when you look at the contracts they have in place and the reliability of their surface water supply. And so where we tried to aggregate in order to provide benefit for just law of large numbers of actually making an analysis. So that's why you don't see it called out specifically. There's a couple instances where we took maybe like an SWP irrigation district and down in Kern County, for example, and lumped all those guys together in order to make it as comparable as possible.
Thanks, Drew. Well, I think
I can answer the last one too.
Yeah,
right?
Sure. It's like another.
How much does the crop yield per acre influence the sale and price thereof? I mean, that's another boots on the ground thing that you verify after you've done some of your initial diligence. And if there's an orchard available, you should have a report from the holding facility. But generally speaking, you get better yields south, say Kern County, and then they fall as you go north, and you introduce some other risks as you go north. I mean, the yields that you get in Kern County are going to be a lot higher than what you would get, say, up in the Sac Valley. So that is one of those things that can be broadly accounted for based on the leaf and based on where that orchard is and the variety types that it has, and that's one of those things that you also verify. But it's a reason why values, I would say, in the Sac Valley for almond ground historically have been a lot less than those down south. Now the trade-off is water, and that is a conundrum that everybody needs to fight through on their own individual analysis basis.
Excellent. All right. Looks like we've covered all the questions. Of course, you can click through on the link and get in touch with me and our team. Whether that's, if you have more questions about the land values report, certainly send them our way. Happy to talk more about this. There's plenty to discuss, right? And it's what I really want to leave off here with is that the market is continuously evolving, right? I mean, it's changed pretty dramatically even since the end of 2023. And what we spend a lot of our time doing at Acres is making sure you have up-to-date data. Even yesterday, I was looking back through, and we have sales coming in from this week. So we maintain a top-notch database with a lot of information. So if you are in that market and analyzing land values, and you want to keep up, particularly with something like the almond trends coming into this year, Acres is a great place to do that. So really appreciate everyone joining today. Go download the full report. Be interested in hearing back from you and your thoughts. Thanks for joining us today. And Drew, thanks for your commentary. Very helpful as always to have your insights on these things.
Yeah, glad we got to do it.